when a car comes in, one of the first things we do is we go over it with the client. We'll look at it, just all the corners, angles. And as I'm looking at it, once you get so many years of doing this service, call yourself, let's say, a master technician of any trade. When you're a master technician of vinyl wrapping or any type of wrap skill set, you start to look at things, and right away in your mind starts processing the corners, the edges, the angles, where you have to put inlays and secondary pieces. So you start looking at the car right away and saying, okay, cool. Okay. Within a few seconds, couple minutes, you kind of have a game plan in your brain already set out how you're going to tackle this project. And then there are those projects that you look at and you're like, oh my God, how the hell am I going to tackle this thing? Those are the ones that test you all the time. They don't come often in that sense, like where they really like, okay, this is a jar. And you take it as a challenge, right? There's one in particular I'll remember all the time. This was in SEMA somewhere around 2008, 9-ish, give or take. It was a car that one of my customers and friends by the name of Jen brought me, and she brought me a Scion XB. But it was just this crazy Japanese body kit. It had all these like fins and mouths and up. And it was like, oh, it's a Scion XB, no problem. And it's a box. And then when I see the car, I start really paying attention to all the body kits and intricacies. At this time, it was a French company named Hexus that was making the only chrome film on the market, which had a laminate on top that had a carbon fiber weave to it. So it was like carbon fiber chrome, or at least, the look of it. And that was the color she chose. And there was 2 finishes, a gold chrome and a silver chrome. So we're like, okay, now I got to figure out how to wrap this intense thing, stretch generation 1 chrome film, which doesn't stretch well, without moving this crazy pattern that's sitting on top of it too much, on this wild body kitted car for SEMA. And that was one hell of a task, I tell you. It tested every being of my skill at that point in time. And mind you, the industry wasn't very old at the time. It was, probably vinyl wrapping just in general, maybe 10 years. But color change vinyls, probably 3 or so years, 4 years. It was tasking. And I remember going to SEMA that year to see it on display. Every time we do cars and there were a display at SEMA, I'd make a point to come down and visit my customers and say hi and see their cars. And I remember just this crowd of Japanese, looked like business people all around it. Either they were Chinese or Japanese. I wasn't close enough to hear what they were saying, but I could just hear through their undertones and through their accent, they're like all talking or pointing at this, looking at the car, because it was parked out in front of the show or the venue. And it was just, it just demanded attention at that time. I'm sure they were probably like, how the hell did this person get a gold and silver chrome Scion XB carbon fiber looking thing? And then actually, I forgot, she covered the entire car in rhinestones. So that was something that I completely forgot. I know for sure I flew out for the LaFerrari for Rich. The LaFerrari was, for paint protection film, probably one of the more, in some areas, one of the more tricky cars to do. It was in the back quarter panels in specific of the LaFerrari that had this kind of swooping shape, and it starts from the center, kind of comes out almost like a manta ray. When you're looking at it from PPF, again, everything is through the lens of like, okay, how am I gonna install this piece of film on this car and make it seamless? So that presented some challenges, but the LaFerrari wasn't overall too bad, other than some components here and there. What was a little bit difficult, I could say, was my first PPF car ever. This was still in the early days of like Gold Rush Rally. I think they had done 1 or 2 at that time. We're all friends because we all live next to each other. Ramin and Nick and Fred and all these Vic and everybody, we're all just in the same area all the time, going to Cars and Coffees every weekend. So we're just a bunch of friends that are, starting drives. Fred comes up to me and he's like, hey, can you wrap my GT3 RS in like that new matte paint protection film? I think he had done maybe a car already at this time from some other outfit. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I can do that. And he's like, all right, cool. I'm gonna get the car soon, and then, I'll just set it up with you. And like, all right, cool. I have, opportunity to do some really cool cars. I'm early in my career at this point, but I've never PPF'd a car before. So I took the job. Before that, I flew out to a school immediately. I found the next class. I found a class in it was in Southern California, and it was a school called Aerotech. And I flew out there, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna sign up for the class, do the whole course. It was like 3 or 4 days. and learned how to install paint protection film at that time, which was a product. I think the matte clear film, the only one that made it was a product called Venture Shield. I learned that, and then I learned, I think 3M was the other brand that were marketing at that time quite heavily. This is pre-Expel days. And I came back after I learned all my skills. He dropped off the car, and I went to town installing this paint protection film on this brand new 997.2 GT3 RS in the whatever color that popular gray was. And then we threw all the GT3 RS graphics, and he picked it up. And the job actually came out for my first car actually really, really well. But then again, it was Fred. I had to make sure it was like all his cars are pet this, pet that. I think that car was called Pet Shark. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, the job came out good. It was reputation, was everything on the line at that time. He loved it, drove it. I remember driving that car for him as well. And at that time, I had just picked up, it was a year before that, my Noble. But at any rate, it was getting his car completely done, dialed out, back in his hands. And from that point on forward, the class that I went to, Aerotech, once they found out about it, they used that particular case scenario as their introduction for their class for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. Like, yeah, there was a guy, came in, he took our class, flew back and prepped an entire Porsche GT3 RS. And that was their way of boasting their class and their skills. But yeah, that was my first PPF car ever. There's certain things you can look at in a car and say, okay, if there's a lot of like little holes, like, and you have to cut around them, you know, some of the old school muscle cars have a lot of vents in the hood or in the cowl areas, and you're like, okay, this is going to be a challenge because there's like 30 on this side and 30 on that side, and I got to cut out each one or cut around each one. If you're doing, whether it's PPF or vinyl, the same principles apply in terms of complexities of certain areas. The cool thing about PPF is certain cars will have pre-cut kits available, but some of these Atelier or some of these like really small bespoke models from a manufacturer or limited run editions, they won't, there's nobody doing the laser system and making pre-cuts for those. So when you look at them, it's like when you look at certain cars, I guess the iconic one that shows a lot of fins would be like a Celine S7, where you have all these little fins. Somebody was talking about one yesterday, so it's still in my head. And you got all these little fins everywhere. So when I look at cars, I'm looking at the rocker panels and seeing if there's like a deep recession or pocket. The Diablo has one right behind the seats when you open the door on the rear vents. Those are really deep pockets and recessions that go in. When you were looking at a car, those are the areas that you're looking at to see, okay, how am I going to tackle this? Where will I put my inlays or any seams? How do I hide them? Where are the light refraction points? And where's all the areas in the car that will light bends really well, where I can hide certain things. It's a game or a challenge that yourself, and it's a war that you're just, or a little battle that you're fighting with this car, and you got to find ways to win. So your client is at least suspecting on it. And sometimes on these, what they call the unibody or whatever it is types of cars, where I remember doing a Porsche 356 years ago, and customer brought it in to wrap it in gloss black. And it's the same principle goes with like the AC Cobras. The car is basically one piece with doors attached to it, right? And the Porsche had this very similar style to it. Everything is all connected. The fenders connected to rockers, rockers connected to quarters, and then all the way back around. So the trunk, the hood, and then the two doors are all separate pieces. Those become challenging because you have to really figure out where you're gonna put your seams. You gotta hide them under fog lamps or underneath a light or something like that. That's how we're able to achieve kind of as clean installs as we can on them. Sometimes we even do a bi-livery to make the car two-tone on purpose so we can hide the seams. I think it was Gold Rush Rally 2010. Essentially that year we sponsored Gold Rush Rally 2, right? And we're the first official wrap company to ever sponsor Gold Rush Rally. And we sponsored them for the first several years. And one of the first cars I did was a Scuderia for Nick Max Jim on social. And back then he had a wide array of cars. One of them was his Scud. But anyways, he wanted to wrap it into camouflage. And he had this shoes, and there was like really cool designer that he used to work with that would customize all his shoes and everything. There was like this desert camo, and we had to wrap the entire car in a camo. That particular Scud was one of the other more difficult cars that I've probably had to wrap, mainly because this camouflage back then in 2010, we had this digitally printed camouflage in Generation 1 film, and we had to make it seamless. When you look at a car that's camouflage, you don't really think about it, but if you really look and pay attention, do each one of the patterns match up to the adjacent panel? and flow over, especially if it's digitally printed. You have to wrap part of the car, then design the next portion of the car to match the part you just wrapped. And that's what we had to do in that case to make everything flow and be seamless. And that Scud came out really, really cool. The overall design, we did the Scud stripes back on again. Like all the other cars, there were little pockets here and there that you had to deal with. The rear, I think it was the rocker panels had some. But just overall, the design flowing on that particular one made it challenging. So that one, as opposed to some of the, crazy fins and stuff, another type of challenge that gets proposed is one with you have seamless designs. You have to make them all kind of connect. And that one is definitely one of them. But it was also one for the books. That car was on like a lot of the magazine covers back in the days, or different types of magazines that we were associating with in the car world back then. That car was in the Heavy Hitters magazine, and at that time it was big. We were all excited to get our copies. A lot of cars we were doing then at that time were like that as well. That year, I think I did a car for Ramin too. He had a Maserati Gran Turismo. He had this Gold Rush Rally print all over the side. And he came up to this idea. He's like, I want to do this ghosted Gold Rush Rally print on the car, but I want it to be a different finish. I want it to be black on black with gold accents. So I had to source different color films with, I think at that time it was just one or two brands manufacturing. It was like Oracal, 3M, and I want to say Avery might have already released their colors. But at any rate, we did this like mustard gold in the center, and then we did the black, and then I had to figure out a way to make a pattern with a different sheen on top that was all Gold Rush Rally. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna cut this out of laminate, matte clear laminate, which was available at the time, and we're just gonna hand weed, try to see through this clear film where this Gold Rush Rally pattern is, and just sit there and weed it out. Weeding is the term where you're just like pulling out all the excess film. That took a long time to execute. But by the time we were done with that whole sheet and hours of spending there, we're like, all right, cool, we got one side done, let's do the next. So we'd cut the next side, and then we ran it through our laminator, and then did it, basically laminated the vinyl with this pattern, I guess you could say, that we created out of laminate. And once we did that, we created this like crazy one-off piece of a two-tone, and then we wrapped the whole side of his car in there, finished out the whole design with a bunch of different accents and accentuated pieces. We did a lot of cars for GR that year, but those two founder cars, I guess you could say, were some of the most difficult that we had to execute for that year.
Buying a used car without getting ripped off is all about research, and we can pull a Carfax or look on the VINwiki app, but there is nothing like an in-person inspection. And the fastest, cheapest, and easiest way to do that is with the Lemon Squad. Lemon Squad has been a longtime sponsor here at VINwiki, and they have representatives all over the country that can put eyes and hands on a car and send you a detailed inspection report plus pictures, usually within 24, 48, even 72 hours. And so there's nothing that makes you a shrewder negotiator than the information that you're going to get from a real person actually seeing the car. So check out the Lemon Squad now at the link in the description below for a special discount. And if you do want a Carfax, they'll even save you $10 on that. The Lemon Squad is who I use every time I'm trying to negotiate a deal, because I can't always be there, especially if it's across the country, but their nationwide network of inspectors can do just that. So check them out now to thank them for their support of VINwiki and buy your car more safely with the Lemon Squad.